Well, good morning, church. How y'all doing this morning? It is so good to see you. It's great to be gathered up today. Everybody who's watching online, we're glad that you could connect today with us. Welcome to week number 2 of Late to the Party. When I wrote this series a few weeks ago, I knew that this week was going to connect back to the previous series that we had done called Uncharted. Uncharted was a study of the life of Abraham, and there was just a whole lot of faith connection, next step things that were so relevant for us when we were doing it. And this week, today, this content is going to be in John chapter 4, but it involves a story where the people involved are at a well called Jacob's well. Jacob is the grandson of Abraham. And so that well was built, and for centuries, people had gotten refreshment from it. Jesus is going to meet somebody there at that well, and that's where our story is going to take place. So I thought that was going to be what this week's connection to Uncharted was. And I felt like as we were going through that series, that it had been unusually faith-moving for me personally. Every sermon I preach first to myself before I preach it to you guys. But that series felt especially close to the heart, and like, man, God was just really moving some freight in my heart through that series. Well, I came to understand this week why God was doing that, because this week we found out that as a family, we're taking a step into an uncharted space right now. We learned this week that my wife, Jamie, has breast cancer. And I can tell you that was a shock to us. I can also tell you that we are both confident in our God, but also concerned about the difficulty of what lies ahead. And we would greatly appreciate your prayers to support her. We're praying for complete healing. And so I would invite you to join us in that prayer, like I know that you will. One of the most given things in the history of ever is that Northview is going to take care of Jamie. That's a story that goes back to her childhood here. And not everybody knows that story, but Northview was so influential in her life as a child and took care of her in a really hard season. So many of you, some of you who are in the room, took care of her. I know that Northview as a church is going to be good to her and good to our family. And most of you know her to be just as sweet as can be, and she is. Those who really know her know that she is also, while sweet as candy, she's tough as nails. And she's the toughest person in our household, and she's absolutely facing this with eyes focused, determined on the battle that's ahead. If anything is an indication of that, just a couple hours after we had our first kind of appointment that started to basically tell us this is where this story was heading, I noticed that she was putting on her coat and she was getting ready to go outside. And I knew what she was doing, but I couldn't quite put it all together because it was that day a few days ago where it snowed again on us, and it was blowing, and it was snowing all day but not accumulating, but it was cold, and it was just stupid, and it wasn't spring yet. It was that day. And so she's zipping up and putting the parka on and the hood up, and she's gonna go out to do her thing. She's gonna go walk. And so she returns 45 minutes later, and I'm like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And she said, well, I had to get my walk in. She wasn't going to be deterred from that. And later that evening, I was sitting just watching some TV, and an alert came on my phone. And it was like a family calendar alert. I don't know if you guys have those, but every time we need to put something on the calendar, then make sure everybody knows it, one of those pops up. Well, my wife uses that to communicate our serving schedule on the weekends, whatever we're doing. And so I noticed 2 notifications, one for first service and one for second service for her this morning to be serving. She picked up a couple open shifts to make sure that she could serve today. That was also when I knew that she's going to do everything in her power to battle and to fight. So she's got her eyes set on the fight that's ahead. She's also got her eyes up where our help comes from on the Lord. And we are going to be walking through this with as much strength and courage as we know how to do. I will be honest, I'm hesitant to share this way. I really am not comfortable in this way. One of the hard things about doing what we do as a pastor, especially on a stage, is that there's a lot connected to it for a lot of our family. And so it feels like you're kind of living in a glass house often. And sometimes there's just a vulnerability that comes with it. Most of my hesitation has nothing to do with your love for us or her. It has to do with my desire to protect her in this. And so as we talked more about it, we decided together that this would be a good way to just kind of get this out to as many people as possible in a general way. So that it would help her avoid any of the whispers. It would help avoid any of the confusion as maybe treatments or as absences might start to stack up. And so that's why we're choosing to do this. Saves her from having to tell the same hard story over and over and over again. Lets the general message get out. Jamie's the varsity volleyball coach here at Danville. The message has gone out to the team. I mean, similar thought is we just wanted to get this out and let people be praying. As far as what's next, I mean, the simplest answer is we don't know. We don't know exactly what's next. There's a lot of tests that are coming, a lot of things that are going to be coming up in the near future. What we do know is next weekend, we're going to get in the car and we're going to drive to Florida like we planned to do several months ago for spring break. We're going to go to her favorite place, to the beach. And then we're going to come back just in time to celebrate 5 times with you guys on Easter and celebrate the hope that we have in Jesus. And then the following week is when the real battle will begin. It's a battle that we know belongs to the Lord. And we're just going to walk faithfully with her through this journey. As far as updates go, I know there's going to be a lot of interest and a lot of concern. And I understand where that comes from. But I will say that probably, we'll see how this goes, but I'm probably not going to stand up here on a regular basis and use this platform as a means of giving everybody updates about everything. I would ask you to continue to pray, but know that she has a good family, great friends, a great circle, a great doctor, and a great God who will be walking with her through this story. They will know the details, and the most powerful prayer you can probably pray is just a simple one. God, please heal. Please heal. And I know you will, and it's easy to do. It's easy to pray for someone who's in need of prayer and struggling, and you know they are. So as Jamie and I were talking, we thought maybe there would be a harder prayer too that you could pray that maybe might honor the spirit of the fight that she's in. It's going to take a little more boldness on your part. It's a harder prayer to pray, but as you pray for her, would you also pray, God, give me the courage and the boldness to share my faith today? I think I say that because what we're trying to do right now is we're trying to shift from just focusing on the struggle and focus instead on what is it that God wants to do in this moment to show his glory or to reach one more person. And so if we could use this pain, this struggle, this battle as a platform for everybody, not only, yes, to pray for her, but to also be praying more intentionally about those around you that don't know Jesus, haven't experienced his hope, man, she would go through this if only for that, just so those prayers could be prayed. If you want to honor her, that's how you can do it. Because honestly, guys, for the most part, that's the only way you all would even know her. Because she has a commitment to do that very thing. That's why we're here. That's why we came here 11 years ago, was to turn the town upside down with the hope that we both have found in Jesus. And so if you could pray, yes, for her, but also for the people who don't know Jesus in our community to come to know him. That's the greatest way for you to honor her. Now, I will have you know that she did not consider this diagnosis to be an excuse that was acceptable for me to not preach today. So I'm still going to preach today. She was not going to allow that to be a means by which we would just shut her down and just mope and be weepy over the situation. No, we're going to open up where we have some hope, where we've always found our hope, and we're going to anchor it in the Word of God. I told you we'd be in John chapter 4 today. John 4 includes this story that no other gospel tells, where Jesus meets a woman at Jacob's well. This is a Samaritan woman. This is immediately, as you start to open up the story, an out of the ordinary, not normal, not the typical way the story goes type story. Jews and Samaritans hated each other. There was a difference in race that was elevated to a contentious level. There was a difference in worship that was elevated to a contentious level. They just didn't like to interact with each other. Socially, there were prohibitions about interacting with each other. But one day, Jesus and his disciples were leaving Jerusalem and heading back towards the Sea of Galilee. And Jesus made a specific point to go through Samaria. That might not mean anything to you, but it's that's not the path that you would normally walk as a Jew. You would normally go around Samaria because Samaritans were the outsiders. They were the compromised. They were the sinners. But something was drawing him that way. Maybe I should say it this way. Someone was drawing him that way. A person who was about to have an encounter that would change everything in their life from that moment forward. The story begins in verse 1 of chapter 4, where it says, Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was gaining and baptizing disciples, more disciples than John, although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples. So he left Judea and he went back once more to Galilee. Now, he had to go through Samaria. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" And his disciples had gone into town to buy food. So the basic story is set. Middle of the day, it's hot. Jesus rolls into town with his disciples. They're hungry. He says, "Go ahead, do your thing. I'm going to stay here." He sits down at this well. He's alone in that moment until this Samaritan woman comes up and talks to him. Women would not be there at that time of day. One, because it's hot. Two, because the whole water drawing thing was one of their social moments of the day. You got to understand the cultures are very different than life is today for us here in America. The men and the women were not going to be interacting and talking like they are today in our culture. And so the women would congregate together in the mornings and draw the water, each respectively for their household, but they would take an inordinate amount of time to do a simple task so that they could chit-chat and connect and do everything they want to do, and then they would go back to their homes. This woman is not following that path, and she's not following that path intentionally. She doesn't want to talk to people. She doesn't want to be talked about around people. And so she's come in the middle of the day, and here is a man at the well that she didn't expect to see. She probably didn't expect to see anyone, let alone a man, let alone a Jew, let alone a rabbi with a reputation, and she certainly wouldn't expect for him to say, "Can you give me a drink?" She replies, verse 9, "You're a Jew and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" She knows this shouldn't be happening. This is not customary. It's not normal. Rabbis don't speak to women. Jews don't speak to Samaritans. Nobody with his reputation speaks to somebody with her reputation. 3 strikes before he even opens her mouth. But Jesus doesn't acknowledge any of those barriers. He just talks to her. He says in verse 10, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water." Now, from this, she pushes back. She doesn't understand what he's talking about. She's like, you don't even have a bucket. You came here to drink. The well is deep. She's not being difficult. She's just looking only through physical eyes. She doesn't see what he's talking about. She doesn't understand. So he redirects. He says in verse 13, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will be in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life." Well, she wants that. This is not ideal, drawing water every day. She still doesn't understand what he's talking about. So she says, "Whatever that is, give it to me so I don't have to keep coming back here." Then Jesus shifts the conversation. He says, "Hey, go call your husband and come back." That's a hard right from talking about, "I'm thirsty and I need water." Where's your husband? Go call him and come back. "I have no husband," she says. And Jesus says, "You're right. The fact is you've had 5, and the man you're with now is not your husband." Well, there it is. That's the very thing she came here to not talk about. That's the whole reason she's here at noon, was so we could avoid this exact conversation. And now we're having it, except it's not just with the ladies, it's with a respected rabbi. And how does he even have a clue? who I am or what I've done or where I come from. So what she does is she shifts the conversation a different direction to a theological debate. Jews and Samaritans argued over where the proper space in the future when the Messiah comes, where is the worship temple going to be? Is it going to be in Jerusalem? Is it going to be on Mount Gerizim? The Samaritans said Mount Gerizim. The Jews said Jerusalem. So she goes, hey, tell me, where, when the Messiah comes, will we worship? She's completely deflecting from the conversation that Jesus was trying to have. This is classic, let's have a theological debate. I've talked with people over the years, and I've wondered at times, just in my mind, I've never said this, but I've often wondered sometimes. There's been a few that have they've been some just ugly spiritual debates over some theology, and I'm all for like a conversation, but sometimes these end up taking such a direction, and I'm like, what are we even doing here? And I've been tempted to ask the same question. Are you sleeping with somebody who's not your spouse? And just shift the conversation entirely. Like, forget theology. Is there an addiction issue going on? Are you looking at porn? Like, what's actually going on right now? Because sometimes all this banter and all this arguing is actually a cover for what's actually underneath, which is like, I've got to try to find a way to cover up everything that I'm screwed up in. Jesus, when she asked this question, when things started to get personal, he doesn't take the exit ramp. He doesn't take the exit ramp. In fact, when she makes mention of the fact that someday the Messiah will come to clear up this whole debate, he says in verse 26, lady, the one talking to you, it's me. Now, I know that's helpful for her to connect the dots, but it's even bigger than helpful. This is the first time in John's gospel that Jesus has ever said something like that to anybody. Like Jesus, it might come as a surprise, but he actually did not parade around, the universe pointing and saying like, I'm the Messiah, I'm the Messiah, I'm the Messiah. He just didn't do that much. He actually lived in such a way, taught in such a way, did miracles and demonstrated things that made you just go, that is the Messiah. You got to declare. What did he tell Peter? What do you believe? He says, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. That word Christ, that you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. But in this situation, he actually explicitly says, I am the Messiah. This is mind-bending that he would have this conversation not first with the disciples, not with the Pharisees, not with the religious leaders, but with a woman who's been divorced 5 times, living with another man at this moment, on the noon, at a well, on a hot day. A Samaritan, no less. That's the first person that he has this conversation with. And so then, after they have this dialogue, she then does this. Verse 28, then leaving her water jar, the woman goes back to town and says to the people, come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah? She goes back to the very town that she's been hiding from, and then John wraps the whole story up and says this in verse 39. Many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. That's the story. That's the story. Now, I want to pull it apart for a second because I've always loved this story, and I've always been fascinated with the way different gospel writers placed the stories that they told in their gospels and why they're there and what they point to and how significant that they are. This is certainly one of those stories, and there is a lot that we could connect to. There's a lot. But I think the most important are the personal realities that are experienced by this woman in this moment that changed her life. Because crucial to the whole story are 3 very fundamental realities. Number 1, she wasn't on his way, but he made her his destination. Like every Jew, to take the same trip that Jesus and the disciples took, would always go around Samaria. That was just like the way it works. It's like going down to Lucas Oil Stadium from here. You are not going through Avon. You are going either down Cartersburg Road to go 70, or you're going up and around through 74. Like you are going to avoid stoplight hell all the way down. That's just what you're going to do. Nobody would go through Avon all the way to downtown. Like no one would do that. Everybody, when making this same trip, would go around Samaria. But verse 4 tells us that he had to go through Samaria. I think in many ways the whole sermon rests on those 6 words. Jesus had to go through Samaria. She wasn't on his way, but he made her his destination. Now, what compelled him to go there? I don't know. It doesn't make sense, but sometimes love doesn't make sense. He went there not because the map said so, but because somebody was there. And he wasn't rerouted. He wasn't making the best of a bad road. He planned the route through her town before she ever picked up that bucket in the morning. She wasn't looking for anything when she went to go draw water. I think there's a difference between like being lost and trying to find your way and having somebody find you when you weren't even looking to be found. That's this woman in this story. She's not looking for a deep spiritual conversation. She's looking actually for no conversation that day. But the thing about a search party, I mean, if someone you know is lost, like you get everybody involved, and all you need them to do is stay put long enough for you to be able to find them. And you're going to come get them. That's what Jesus is doing here. He organized a one-man search party. He walked through territory nobody else would walk through just to get to her. Every detail of this encounter says the same thing. His disciples don't know why they're there. They come back from lunch and they're like, what are you talking to her for? Every part of this conversation was intentional. He chose Samaria when he could have gone around. He sat at that well at that specific hour. He waited. She thought she was going to the well for water. He knew he was going to the well for her. Think about that. Nothing of this makes sense except for the fact that she was the destination. That was a divine conversation that he had in mind to have with her. And then it gets even better. He didn't find out and leave. He already knew and stayed anyway. Like, what's cool about this story is that it doesn't go like this. Two strangers meet, one stranger shares their backstory, other stranger goes, yee, and gets away. That's not what happened. He already knew. And he sat down. And he stayed there anyway. He knew about the husbands. He knew about the failures. He knew about the man that she was living with now. He knew why she came at noon. He didn't discover the conversation discover her history mid-conversation and reconsider the offer. He didn't do it. In fact, what I love about this is that he doesn't even first bring up her past. He makes an offer first. He says, I have for you water which will satisfy you forever. He offered grace first, truth second. He offered her a gift that she could have never achieved or found on her own, and then immediately talked to her about the hardest thing in her life. Now, when he tells her about her 5 husbands, she says, I see you're a prophet. I see you're a prophet. Oh, it was a lot more than that. But she could, normally for someone to know that about her, they would bolt. I think she's more than anything stunned that he's still talking with her. I see that you're a prophet. She's not offended. She's like I said, she's stunned. In her experience, people that knew her past used it against her. But Jesus didn't. He kept talking. He kept offering. He kept staying. And then, as we said, he offered her an invitation to see him as the Messiah. And not after she cleans up, not after she gets it all together, not after she has all the right answers, but right there in the middle of the mess. I mean, this is full exposure with full acceptance. You know what we call that around here? We call that messy grace. Messy grace. We love to say that it's not that God's grace is messy, it's that you and I are messy. And that his perfect grace has incredible ways of meeting us where we are when we need it. And that's what's happening here. He told her the hard truth about herself that she tried to cover. And this goes on all around us every day. There are people that we run into, people that we work with, that we maybe live in the same home with, who are carrying burdens that are inside that they don't want to talk about, that they maybe don't even know how to cope with. And the way they cope with it might come out in a number of different ways: anger, confusion, depression, alcoholism, relationships. Just every time, they're just trying to fill something of a hole, trying to drink something that'll make them feel satisfied, and they just can't find it. What we see on the surface is just like this protective wall. And you know what? Sometimes it's not even that the brokenness is out there. Sometimes it's that the put-togetherness is out there. Some people work so hard to put the put-togetherness of their life out on display so that no one would ever be able to look inside and ask the tough questions, and I'm going to do everything I can to project this perfect outer shell and image, put on my plastic smile, and make it look like everything is okay. And you do that day after day after day, and your soul is just crying out for some water. Jesus meets this woman in this moment with her soul crying out, knowing everything that he knew about her, and he stayed. He stayed. He didn't leave. That's always, I think, part of why John told that story, I think, is because it just showed God's grace in such a perfect form. But maybe one more thing that stands out. She came to hide from everyone, but she left to tell everyone. Like, you can't miss this in the story. She came to hide, she left talking. She came at the well at noon to avoid people, and then she left immediately to go tell the very people that she was trying to avoid. And the jar that she came to fill, she left it. It was forgotten. I think it's such a great picture of the things that we used to try to fill our lives with. But once you find Jesus, they don't matter anymore. And you realize those wells are never going to fill you up. God's grace has a way of making you forget the bucket that you used to use to drink from to satisfy you. She met someone who knew everything, offered her something anyway, and you can't stay hidden after that. The very people she avoided now become her first stop. Look at what she says when she gets back into town. Verse 29. Come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah? Could this be the Messiah? She doesn't hide her past. Now she leads with it. And the very thing that she was afraid of becomes her opening line. Come see the man who told me everything I ever did. She didn't sanitize her story before she told it. She led with the hardest part. Let me tell you about the guy who told me everything I ever did. It's still the most powerful testimony anybody could give. And I've seen this over and over in ministry, where often the person that has the most to hide ends up being the one that has the most to say. Once they step into the light and they experience that living water in Jesus, he redeems that story. He restores that past. And that very pain that they wouldn't have wished they went through becomes a platform for God to move in their life. And it becomes one of the most defining parts of their life. You know, I told you, I've always been fascinated by this story, in part because, you know, John could have told a lot of stories. He could have told us a lot about what he witnessed with Jesus. In fact, he says at the end of the book, at the end of the gospel, he says, if we had all the books in the history of the world, all the pages of all the books in the history of the world could not contain all the stories that I have to tell about Jesus. So that already kind of sets a tone for how special the group of stories we have is. The other thing is, like, he writes a lot different than the other gospels. So like Mark is the first gospel that we got. Mark comes from Peter's preaching. And the word that shows up over and over in Mark is the word immediately. Immediately. Immediately Jesus did this. And then immediately Jesus did this. And then immediately the disciples went here. And then immediately the Spirit was cast out. And then it's just go, 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 go. It's like as fast as I can. No one's written any of this down. I want to get it on paper. God's put it on my heart so that you can hear it. I'm going to tell as much about Jesus in as few chapters as possible and squeeze everything in. That's Mark. That's the Gospel of Mark. John is like, I'm going to let this marinate for a little bit. I'm going to wait. So John writes at the very end of his life, decades after Mark has been written, Luke has been written, Matthew's been written, way later. And I can just imagine him just thinking like, how, if I could just, God, help me to pick out the stories that tell this the best. And this is one of them. This is one of them. I stole this off the back of a seat a little bit ago. It says reserved. I knew I was going to mess up on this one. It's reserved for my nose. Oh, whew. I think this story is in the Bible so you would know that you're not an accident. You're the reason he came. You're the reason he came. And the thing that you're most afraid for him to know, he already knows. But he's still here. He stayed. He's not going anywhere. And he's offering you grace, just like he's offered that Samaritan woman. This story's in the Bible because it's such a universal picture of what grace looks like. And what it means to come into a relationship that you didn't even know you needed, you didn't even know you were maybe looking for, but he comes to find you. You were his destination. He knows everything. He's still here. And your story isn't something that God has to get past to be able to use you. It is the very past that he uses you to share about his goodness and his glory and what he can do in your life. There's a phrase in recovery communities that your mess becomes your message. Or maybe you've heard it, your pain can become your platform. That's what happened for this woman. And an entire town comes to faith in Jesus because she was able to platform the ugliest part of her life and say, that's not who I am anymore because Jesus changed me. Guys, that's a testimony that turns people's heads, not the one where people would say, hey, I got it all together. I mean, you say that and people will smile politely and turn away. But when you say, I was a wreck and Jesus found me at the well, all the heads turn. So friends, if I could leave you with words, it would be these. You don't have to have it all together. You don't have to have it all together. Just show up at the well and let Jesus do the rest. Will you stand with me? Will you pray?